All right. Welcome back to another Solar Surge live training. We are streaming out live to YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And folks, of course, we are here every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern time for 1 hour on the live sales training. And by the way, guys, the reason that we do these live is so that you can post your questions and comments and we can get answers to your questions in real time. So if you're on the YouTube feed, you can go ahead and put your questions in the chat feed. Or if you're on Facebook or LinkedIn, just put a comment on the post and that'll come up here so that we can address those issues in real time. At this time, I'd like to bring in my co-host, Dan Freshley, CEO of Radiant Solar, and of course, my partner and co-instructor for Solar Surge University. Dan, it's really good to see you today and looking forward to giving this training with you on one of my favorite topics, which is time management. But welcome back to the broadcast.
Yeah, always good, Joe. And I'm a big fan of this topic as well. I think if you were to browse my YouTube history, I mean, I found myself even doing it this morning, not in preparation for this. I'll tell you that I had already time managed that part, but I'm always looking for productivity hacks. I'm always looking for ways to be a little bit more efficient, better systems, whatever it may be. So, looking forward to jumping in and talking about that here today.
Yeah. Well, this is such an important topic, whether you're talking about success in sales or success as an entrepreneur. We all have 24 hours in the day, right? And a big part of what differentiates that are successful in business and life, what you name it, in the gym, and those that are not successful is just how much time they are dedicating to productive activities, right? And in a sales position, it's especially important because unlike a typical office job, or even if let's say you're on a door-to-door sales team where you have a manager who's directly supervising you, directly kind of telling you what to do throughout the day. In most sales careers, in most and of course, if you're an entrepreneur, you don't really have that. You don't have the boss telling you what to do. You have to tell yourself what to do. And for me, the most important tool that I use to keep myself organized is my calendar. Dan, I know we were chatting offline the other day. It's like if it's not on the calendar, it's not getting done. I mean, maybe it'll get done, but likely it will not get done. So if it's not on the calendar, it's not going to get done. And we have to really actively manage our time because frankly, it's our most precious resource. It is the one resource that we cannot buy back. And so that's why today's training is going to be so important for success in solar sales. Any other thoughts, Dan?
Yeah, no, it's incredibly important, and I know that the primary premise of our channel and the topics we cover a lot has to do with solar and sales and professional sales, but this just applies to life and sales and business and leadership in general. I've studied and listened to. I'm a big fan of John Maxwell and heard a lot of his stuff over the years, and he's talked about how when he's done time audits with some of his clients that he does executive leadership coaching with, he challenges them. And I've never done this and I really should and try to do it, but he challenges them for a 2-week period to document everything they did in 15-minute intervals. And what's pretty cool about that study is he says he'll get with these people, they'll do a debrief on it, and they'll realize that even the world's most productive. I mean, John Maxwell's coached presidents before. He's worked with them on leaderships. He's done really high caliber things. He said that even some of the most productive people in the world waste hours per day doing things that really weren't important. So sometimes every now and then that's kind of like my North Star, right? I have to come back to that and remember like, hey, how much time am I wasting just a scroll here on my phone or a email task over here that probably wasn't super imperative and important that I got to right away. And so I try to implement those strategies and remind myself of that and refresh that every now and again, going back to some podcasts, of his or other leadership, coaches. So, yeah, looking forward to kind of talking through that. And it's an always growing thing, right? Like I'm always finding ways that, hey, in this season of life, this is working really well for me. Okay. Hey, new variable. Now I need to adapt. I need to adjust. So I think the quest for perfect time management is exactly that. It's a quest. But if you do it well, I think those that do it well are going to be significantly better and perform better, not just in solar sales, but in their life and in their happiness and in their personal pleasures and and such. So looking forward to talking about that more here.
Yep, absolutely. Well, within the context of solar sales, because that's mainly what we're focusing on in today's training is how do you do proper time management to maximize your solar sales? There are a few key sales activities that have to happen, frankly, on a daily basis. If you're actively in the sales profession as a representative, not as a manager, but as a representative, then there are certain things that you have to do every day. And Dan, the first basic three that come to mind to me are, prospecting, i.e., getting leads, needs analysis, qualifying those leads, and then delivering proposals and presentations, right? If you can't get a lead, get an opportunity, qualify the lead, analyze the lead so that you know how to deliver a proposal, and then actually be delivering those proposals, if that's not happening on a constant and repeated basis, then something's broken with your operation.
Absolutely. I'd add in the only other one there too that's important as well is your follow up, right? You've got to make
Yeah.
sure that you're engaging in follow up. There's a lot of sales gurus and leaders that says like that is where business is won and lost, right? Like it's easy. I think anybody, assuming you've got the leads part covered, look, if someone reaches out to me, I'm happy to give you a proposal, right? I get on that pretty fast. But where I found myself lack a lot of times is in the follow up. And what I find too is sometimes it's not planning for the follow up properly. Like, how am I going to block my time? When is my cadence of follow up going to happen? Because we're busy people, right? Things are going on. If you're not planning that element too, you're going to forget to do it. It goes back to what you said, and we're probably going to repeat it time and time again here today. But it's like, if it's not on the calendar, it's not going to happen. And if my follow up's not on the calendar, if my call so and so or whatever it needs to be is not there, I probably will forget to do it. Even if I use reminders apps or notepads or whatever, it's like I need that time to really show up of like, hey, 3 p.m. Solar Surge live training. Okay, great. I know what I'm doing. Right. Even right up to this, I was busy with some other stuff and had to quickly kind of pivot and change gears. So the follow-up is easy to forget about if you don't plan it.
Yep. No, that's a great point. I'm glad that you asked that as well, because you're right. Follow up, there are going to be very few sales where you just send the proposal and they say yes, right? There's typically at least some objections, some questions, something that needs to happen to get them over those last few hurdles to get to close the deal. And so that's why, as you build your model weekly calendar, and we'll talk more about how to build a model calendar, and I'll even show you the example that we teach in Solar Surge University. But you have to have that daily time for follow up as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of this follow up is not trivial, Dan. I mean, I'll just talk about my personal projects. A lot of times, especially if I have a well researched technical buyer, I might send a proposal, and even though they're very positive overall on my proposal, they may email me back with 15 different questions. And so I have to have a time block in my calendar where I can actually respond thoughtfully to that email and address every one of those 15 points. It's not something I can just squeeze in, as you said, because the reminder told you to do it. If there's not a time block on your calendar where you're sort of mentally focused on, I'm going to do quality follow-up, some of those people I need to call on the phone. Some of those people maybe I can text, but people that send these long emails, I have to have time to draft responses that are well thought out and cover the prospect's needs. So again, all that time has to be on your calendar. And I don't know about you, Dan, but I know for me, at the pace that I'm going now, my calendar is almost entirely fully blocked
Yeah.
by the time the week starts. Typically my assistant already has the whole week planned out for me. I may have 1 or 2 hours of open free space, but it's pretty much all blocked out. And if I do end up having any free time, it's because maybe I finished a meeting early, or maybe I didn't take my entire lunch hour. I just got finished early and was able to do some more things. But I think that's kind of where you want to be in terms of maximizing productivity. Is there really shouldn't be a whole lot of white space on your calendar. I
Yeah.
don't know, Dan. What are your thoughts when it comes to how to set up a model calendar?
No, I totally agree. So, in my earlier years in solar, just as a professional in general, I used to think like, oh, why do I need to put that on the calendar? Right. Isn't that just kind of clouding my calendar? And again, like some of these things are just personal preferences, personal styles. But for me, much like you, Joe, like I pretty much put everything on the calendar. It's almost like a good analogy or good equation is when my wife and I do our budget, right? And we'll go through the budget and we'll break down the numbers and we'll say, okay, hey, here's where we are. Here's our expenses. Here's what's left over. Well, if you're doing a budget properly, in my opinion, when you get to the point where you're at the end of it, the number's probably going to say zero. And at first, my wife, different personality, different style, was like, wait, why? Isn't that a problem? Isn't that bad? I was like, no, well, of course, we've allocated for everything. We've covered our mortgage, we've covered our tithing and our giving, and our savings or our investing are the things. So the goal ultimately from my budgeting style is I'm going to get to zero because I've allocated all of those resources, all of those dollars towards either expenses, investments, charitable contributions, whatever it is, and I got down to zero. If I'm at a point where there is still a positive number, hopefully there is, a lot of times I'm then picking that back up as additional savings or additional investment opportunity. And I think the same thing kind of goes with our time, right? Like when I look at my calendar and I look at how many hours I have in a day, I typically want to allocate those hours somewhere. Sometimes that means, hey, I'm using this time to do an actual like action of the business. I'm designing a proposal, or I'm replying to emails, or I have a call block. But other times maybe there's a little gap in there where I'm like, you know what? I'm actually going to schedule myself. There was something I've been intending to research, and I want to go research a little bit more about some of the latest products that just came out. I'm blocking 30 minutes to do that. So rather than me just kind of thinking to myself, and some of these things, my personal style is I like to, as the week begins, see where the white space is. And I kind of already in my mind have an idea of things I want to get done this week. Some of my like wish list items that are maybe on like a to-do list, right? My to-do list for me personally is typically things that don't have to be done with a particular time sensitivity, other than maybe it has to be done in a certain day, right? So I might put a reminder to myself, hey, tomorrow I need to complete XYZ. I need to, go send this package off in the mail. Doesn't matter what time it happens. I just need to go do it. So then I'll look at my calendar for the week, have an idea of some of those like things I got to accomplish, and then I'll fill them in as my week progresses and where I find that I have white space, right? Voids. And ideally by the end of it, like my budget, it gets down to zero, right? I get down to a point where it's like, I don't have a white space. There's nothing there. Like I've got something filling that time. And we'll talk more about that, but I've implemented that strategy in my personal life and my dates with my wife. Like I used to think, hey, that's not really romantic, but we found out that actually it is more romantic because I'm strategically planning and coordinating. Like, hey, I need to block this time, otherwise it's not going to happen. And so we do those kind of things. But anyway, not to go ramble on too much, but that's a big part of my philosophy when it comes to time management as well.
Absolutely. No, I think budgeting one's time and budgeting one's finances is pretty much the same thing, because you're taking finite resources, finite valuable resources, and saying, look, I have to put this towards things that are important to me, right? Or towards things that are important to my business, important to my career, right? And so just as you said, I think that's absolutely right. You shouldn't have extra slack in your budget. If that means you can save more, then put it in the savings budget item, so that you're telling your cash where to go, you're telling your time where to go.
Yeah.
Right? Time management is really all about managing yourself, telling yourself what needs to be done and keeping yourself on track with what needs to be done, because there's so many distractions here. And I'm victim to it too, guys. I mean, look, I may be in the middle of my workday, maybe I'm uploading a YouTube video, and I just happen to hit the YouTube homepage. And then of course it shows me a couple dozen thumbnails of things I want to watch, right? And
Yep.
usually it's pretty spot on topics that I'm into. And so, sometimes it's hard. I'll click on a video and then I have to tell myself, I'm not supposed to be doing this right now. I actually have to get my next video edited and get that process going through. So, the calendar is an excellent tool to help you do that. And I think the question that you want to be asking yourself throughout the day, or as you're planning your schedule for the week ahead, is, what is the most valuable use of my time right now? Or what are the most valuable activities that I need to do during my work week? And again, usually if you're a sales representative, a frontline sales representative, it's going to be things involving face-to-face or telephone, real-time calling, texting, emailing, Zoom calls, delivering proposals, but basically face-to-face, right? Somehow you are face-to-face, or you are directly interacting with a qualified prospect. In general, those are going to be the highest value hours that you can spend throughout your workday. However, you have to make time for the other requirements as well. Like, for example, I recommend having a half an hour to an hour time available each day just for administrative issues. So that might be sending out contracts or doing contract revisions. If you're a team leader or a dealership owner, that might mean calculating and paying out commissions to your sales reps, to your appointment setters. Like, all of that requires time on your calendar. And again, if that time is not scheduled, oftentimes those tasks don't get done, or they don't get done timely. And that's not what you want, especially if you have a team under you that's expecting to get paid on time, get their leads delivered on time, if you're providing leads to them. If there's trainings that need to happen, team meetings, like all of that stuff should be happening like clockwork. And frankly, if you have your model week built out, and again, we'll show you the Solar Surge model weekly calendar, but if you have the model week built out like that, there really shouldn't be a whole lot of open space, right? You want a little bit of flexibility so that you can adjust and make sure that you're open to opportunities as they come up, but there shouldn't be a whole lot of open space that's unallocated.
Yeah.
Dan, I'll kick it back over to you.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, one of the things that I do as well, guys, is that I've over the years, there's nothing more uncomfortable than when you were maybe coming from one meeting, you're going to another, but then you feel rushed. And then, especially if you're running back to back to back, right? There's different philosophies of like, hey, you try to consolidate events that are similar so that you kind of get in a groove of doing those things. But sometimes it's really hard if you're going from one sales presentation to the next. You don't have enough time, and sometimes one personality takes a little longer to kind of build rapport with or get into things. And if you run yourself too tight, you can run, one meeting gets delayed, then it delays another, and it causes this ripple effect. So I've also learned over the years that in some of the activities that I do, I might schedule a particular amount of time. I might say, hey, yeah, 30-minute meeting. But in my mind, I know, hey, I need to be prepared that this meeting could be 45 minutes. It could be an hour, whatever the cadence is. So my calendar might show a 30-minute block, but then I'll override my calendar as well and I'll actually put block on my calendar where I will pad that meeting just to make sure that there's something there. Other times too, if I want to remain flexible to something that might pop up, I might just need to go in and put a block, like an hour block. So my calendar methodology, and obviously people can take it for what it's worth, is I use two different naming conventions for things. If I go in and put a block, it's just because I'm trying to make sure that nothing can get auto booked onto my calendar. Someone doesn't schedule an appointment with me. I just know that I'm probably going to need that time either as, a remainder of a task that I'm completing or the start of another task. Or I just need to make sure I have a little safety cushion in there. If I put out of office, that's typically, and this is also in a shared calendar environment, the out of office one, because that way people can check my calendar and just know, hey, Dan says out of office right now. He's probably not accessible. Block means I'm typically accessible. It just means that I'm occupied with my time. Out of office means I'm plugged out. I've got stuff going on with my family or some other prior commitment. And you can expect that I'll follow up with you once I'm back, type of thing. So that's what I've just found to work well. I know some of the other, while we're on kind of the topic of like standard blocks that I put in, I have a lunch block every single day because again, if I don't schedule it, I won't do it. My wife, there's tons of times where my wife at 2-3 in the afternoon is bringing me food up here to my home office because I've forgotten to eat. And enough times went by where I was like, you know what, I need to put a calendar block for lunch. Now, I will admit I'm guilty a lot of times of working into my lunch hour, doing other things, but at least I know it's there, right? It's scheduled and saying, hey, reminder, you need to eat some food. I'll have a block that just for me as a business owner and kind of a leader and manager, I have admin work, right? There's certain admin tasks that whether I like them or not, I need to block it to do it because there's certain things I have to do. I've got payroll, right? I have a payroll block. It's like I'm like you were just saying, Joe, run payroll, process payroll, commissions. Just I need dedicated time to think about those things, and I can't mess up someone's pay schedule. Now, obviously, as a business grows, hopefully you're outsourcing some of these tasks. But as the leader, you're probably still going to need to have oversight on some things and still have a block, even if that just means like, let me just double check this, make sure it's right. Um, accounting is another one that I have a block for, just making sure that I'm reviewing my accounting, my numbers are correct. For me, I like doing that every Friday afternoon. It's kind of the close of my week, if you will. That's just a task I do at that time. So there's different things that I kind of fill in there. Joe, I don't know if you have any, maybe like these standard generalized blocks that you like to apply for some of your tasks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to share a few of mine. So one of them is, just reviewing the KPIs of the business. So first thing Monday morning, right after my gym time. And by the way, fitness, self-care, all that time should be built into your calendar as well. So for me, I like to get my exercise done first thing in the morning, between like school drop off, if I have to take the kids to school, between school drop off and about 9 a.m. is when I like to do that. And then on Monday mornings, I have a half an hour block to review the key performance indicators, right? I want to see how the business did the previous week. And for me, I'm looking at indicators like how many new leads came in or how many booked appointments. That's what we call them here at Solar Surge, because most of the customers book their own appointments onto our calendar. So how many booked appointments, how many proposals went out, how many deals closed, what was the closing percentage? And there's some other things that we look at as well. Of course, now that we're doing a lot of sales education, we also look at, how many people enrolled in Solar Surge University and how many completed the course and how many became Solar Surge onboarded as a Solar Surge sales representatives. But all of those numbers, I like to look at those first thing Monday morning to see how the business did the previous week, so that immediately when we go into our team meeting, which is usually right after that, maybe half an hour after that, we kind of know if there are any tactical issues that we need to address to get the business sort of back in the healthy zone. before we start talking more big picture and strategic issues. So there's got to be a time block on the calendar for that. Now, I also kind of struggled back and forth with this. Should I block a lunch hour? I know, Dan, you may have as well. Something in the past, I've gone through some sales trainings that'll talk about like, oh, you don't have time for lunch. You just need to kind of be working all the time and just grind and grind and grind. Yeah, I get the spirit behind that, and we definitely should be grinding and hustling. But the reality is, you have to eat, and sometimes I have to run to the bank, run to the dry cleaners, just do little stuff like that. And so having that 1 hour block allows me not just to eat, but if there's any just little life stuff that has to happen, I allow it to happen within that 1 hour block. But of course, like I'm sure many of you do, I find myself working into that lunch hour as well. And then typically what I have right after that in my 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. block is my YouTube work. So for me, prospecting is YouTube, right? YouTube is personally how I generate leads. And so, there's at least an hour every day that I dedicate to what has to happen to maintain the YouTube channel. That may mean reviewing edits that my editor just put up on the board before we publish them. It might mean getting my editor some guidance on some timestamps or how to cut a particular video for a short clip that we're working on. But whatever it is, my YouTube work for the day gets done in that 1 to 2 p.m. hour block. Again, for those of you who are doing lead generation in a different way, it's just a reminder, hey, you need to spend time on prospecting and lead generation. And I would say ideally you're doing 2 hours a day of that. Mondays for me get a little bit busier because we have team meetings and weekly reviews and things. So I only have a 1 hour block on Mondays, but then most of the other weekdays, we have 2 hours of lead generation or prospecting, 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the afternoon.
Yeah. I think for those that are doing lead gen a different way too, I think having an advertising review block, like a KPIs for that, is important, right? So I know I have every Thursday, I have a meeting with one of my key advertising people where I'm jumping on and I'm reviewing numbers. I'm looking at ad spend. I'm looking at ad copy, creatives, new strategies, new plans we want to roll out, things like that. So, again, making sure you keep eye on those things is also super important. For that exact purpose. I think the other thing too, because Joe, you commented a couple times about team meetings. When you schedule your team meetings, I think also matters, but you have to consider this too, guys, like depending on what your team structure looks like, right? Because as you grow your business and as you evolve into the position of, hey, maybe you've got a growing company, it's not just you as a solo sales rep or a couple people. You need to be mindful of like, what is the kind of work life balance, so to speak, that you're providing to the people on your team. So I know years ago, Joe, we used to do sales meetings on Fridays and we pivoted away from Fridays to doing them on Mondays. And some companies like to do them on Tuesdays. And the logic there too is that by the end of the week, if there's a time when a lot of people may take possible vacation days or a 3-day weekend with the family or whatever it is, it's probably going to be on a Friday. And so what had happened a lot of times is we had people that weren't able to show up, things were going on. We were never actually seemed like we were never actually always there as a team. And so we changed that from Fridays to Mondays. And the idea on the Friday originally was, hey, it's the end of the week. Let's digest what we did this week. But the problem became, right, people were absent, things were happening. And so we weren't ever getting a full participation. So we moved them to Mondays instead. And we just essentially were looking back on, okay, what did we do last week? And then what can we do going forward this week? Now Mondays, like a lot of people, because it's the start of week, sometimes those get really chaotic. So some companies and people like to do them on Tuesdays because sometimes Mondays can be one of those days where people take an extended weekend, right? And they do a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and a Monday. So a bulk of things, if you can do things in like that Tuesday to Thursday basis, a lot of times that's probably like your super safe zone. But we do a lot of our team meetings on Mondays. You and I, we have our Solar Surge meeting Monday. I have a separate meeting with my Radiant team on Monday, have another Radiant related meeting on Wednesday. So there's different things that I kind of structured in there. Just because it works well with our cadences and our flow. But those are some things to kind of consider is when you have some of those weekly recurring meetings, when do you actually schedule them? And make sure they're productive as well, right? Don't get in the habit of them just being a waste of time. I think it is important that you always are as a team, especially if you operate in a virtual world. There needs to be some check-ins. But I can remember, fresh out of college, the first ever job I had before I got into solar, we had a Monday morning meeting we had a everyday morning meeting. We called it like our board meeting. And then we had the same thing in the afternoons. Now it was a little bit of an office environment, right? Where you were kind of putting up the things that we accomplished for that day. But I would encourage people maybe operate the same way, even if you do things virtually. You can do a group text, you can do a quick FaceTime call, you can do a Slack message thread, which is one of the tools we use here is Slack. And sometimes it's just a matter of like, hey, what am I accomplishing today? Hey, what did I accomplish today? And it's kind of an accountability measure. So think about ways that you maybe want to implement that depending on how your team structure is.
Yep. Yep. Now, one thing I would like to comment, because I know we've talked a lot about, administrative work and teams and payroll. Folks, if you're brand new to solar sales, or if you're brand new, maybe switching from in-person or door-to-door sales, switching to virtual, I would recommend that you make sure that you get your personal time management down first before you start trying to expand a team or onboard a team underneath you. I know, especially for those of you that are on the doors, there is a lot of that sort of like, hey, always be recruiting mindset, always be adding new bodies mindset. But if you're in that transition where you have not yet built a consistent, predictable pipeline and flow, the first calendar you have to manage is just your own. You have to get into the flow to where, again, those four key activities for you are happening every day: prospecting, qualifying, proposals, and follow up. That has to be happening on an ongoing, repeated basis for you first, before we can look at, hey, how do we scale this up, or how do we grow a team out from here? So I just wanted to share that, because I have seen a lot of reps that are new to virtual. They can get very confused, and it ends up being unproductive and confusing, because they got more people to manage, but they haven't got their own production up yet. So that's certainly where you want to start. But the other thing that I wanted to share, Dan, that took a little bit of getting used to as well, going from the in-home sales model to the virtual sales model, is that a lot of the windshield time that we used to have doing in-home sales, I know you and I used to spend a lot of that doing audiobooks and personal development. And so a lot of that was our sort of continuing education time. That education is no less important just because you're selling in a virtual environment. So
Mhm.
that time needs to be scheduled onto the calendar as well. Whether you need to listen to your podcast, listen to an audiobook, read a physical book, but whatever it is that you need for your continuing education, your continuing development, make sure that you have time blocks for that. Because that's another thing, is it's very tempting to say, hey, I'm virtual, I can just go from lead to lead to lead to lead and just sell all day. But if you're not developing yourself professionally, for example, making time for this 1 hour live training, hopefully many of you have this blocked in your calendar so that you can be giving your full undivided attention to this training and getting the maximum value out of that. But I think that's important too, Dan, is having that personal development time on the professional calendar.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that I think, frankly, if I'm being transparent, one of the things I miss about the old ways of how we did a lot of our sales was that drive time. Right. For me, I joke about it, but it was kind of therapeutic in a way, right? Just like
Yep.
me, the windshield, and the blacktop ahead of me, an audiobook. It could be anything you wanted it to be, guys. Right? Like a core value for us is definitely about continuous growth and self-development, and that can be measured a lot of different ways, right? The same way I believe you should be prioritizing your work balance, your personal life, your physical fitness. There could be spiritual sides of it, right? There's a lot of things, but that's something I do miss, is I miss like as much road time as we used to get. Now my odometer doesn't miss it, but the reality of it is like I have to find ways to do that in other places, right? Like for me, trying to listen to audiobooks and work out doesn't work for me. Right. Like I want music when I'm working out because it just kind of helps me in that phase, but I have to find other ways to listen to audiobooks or to read or to listen to podcasts. And sometimes it's just like, hey, someone's doing a live stream and I want to tune into that. I'm blocking an hour for this because it's valuable. Um, going back to something that you talked about a little bit earlier, Joe, I know you and I have both read this book, and I think it's a good recommendation for a lot of people, but it's Dan Martell's Buy Back Your Time. Right. And I don't know if you got it sitting right there. There it is. Right. But it's a really good book from just a principle perspective of like, how do you buy back your time? And one of the things I've been kind of down the rabbit hole on YouTube and research on is like, how do I optimize my email inbox, right? Like, how do I create filtering steps from emails that I get a lot of times that are valuable, but they don't need to show up in my inbox right away. I need to send them to a separate folder. I need to review them later. One of the exercises he talks about in the book, and I might mess it up, but I think the general premise is you go through your calendar and you're doing a calendar audit, and you can print this out. You can do it whatever way you want, and essentially label the things with dollar symbols that are the most significant revenue generating activities. Could be multiple dollars, could be $1, right? Do it on a scale of $1 symbol to 5. And obviously the tasks that are $5 symbols are super high revenue, super high value, and you have to do those tasks. But also when you do those things, color code them, green being the things you enjoy doing, red being the ones that you don't like doing. Now, the reality of it is let's just say you've been at this business for a long time and you feel like you're getting stuck in the like, oh man, I'm just a sales rep. I'm doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. And you're losing desire to be selling solar, but it's a high revenue generator for you. It's how you provide your income. And maybe your goal is you want to grow a team or you want to build a business or whatever it is. It's possible that you might have $5 symbols next to the sales presentation and it could be in red, meaning you don't like doing it. But because it's so valuable, you have to do it. So the reality of it is like there's certain things where they're going to be high value tasks that you don't like doing, and you're going to have to keep doing them, at least for the current season you're in. Now, the bigger challenge though is that if it's a red item and it's only $1 symbol, the question then becomes, how can you delegate that? How can you hand that off to somebody else? How can you optimize your time more efficiently? There's a lot of things, especially as AI is growing. AI can help in a lot of different ways. I've only really kind of began to scratch the surface on some of that, but I know there's different tools out there that does calendar planning and help you write emails or whatever it might be that AI can be leveraged. So that's a good exercise, I think, just to kind of go through and figure out like, what are your high revenue generating responsibilities? What are the things you like and you don't like doing, right? Keep doing the things you like doing because that gives you joy, it gives you passion, it gives you excitement, right? And try to find ways to delegate or eliminate the significance of the amount of things that you're doing that you don't like doing, and grow from there. So that's a task, and that's kind of a process I went through that helped me sort of prioritize my daily activities. And then the other principle of buy back your time is about like, hey, you have what he calls your buyback rate, right? And that's your ability to say, hey, look, this is lower than what my value is. Challenge everybody here, depending on where you're at in your life and your career, but like go calculate what your hourly wage is. How much money did you make last year divided by how many hours of work you put in? What is your hourly rate? And what he says in the book, and correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but he essentially says anything that is a quarter of that rate, you can afford to delegate to somebody else. And the logic there is that quarter could be a lot, right? I mean, if you're making $1 million a year, he's essentially saying if this task is something that a $250,000 a year person can do, delegate it. But the real principle of what he's trying to get across is that in that gap, in the time you give yourself back, you can probably go pay for that 250,000 multiple times over by doing the things you're good at, right? So maybe you delegated 250,000 to somebody else, and I'm making up a number, obviously, people, but like maybe that 250 turned into you generating $750,000 of additional revenue, additional income because you delegated tasks. And so that's something I've been really working on over the past handful of months, as I've got some people assisting me in like admin related stuff. And also just using tools that are effectively free that help me optimize some of that as well. So I don't know, Joe, any thoughts behind
Yeah.
that? Because you turned me on to the book and I really enjoyed it as we kind of, went through it.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm glad that you mentioned it because I had it right here on the table here as a reminder to share with the audience, because a couple of really excellent lessons. So the first is understanding what your actual hourly rate is, right? And this is a way that you can objectively measure your productivity. And the way that you calculate it is very simply take what you earned last year and divide it by 2,000. So the calculations that he uses or he teaches is just assume a standard 2,000 hour work year, which basically is like a 40-hour work week. And so you take your total earnings, divide it by 2,000, and it keeps the math pretty simple. So let's just use some round numbers here. Let's say you earned $200,000 last year. If you divide that by 2,000, then that means your hourly rate is $100 an hour, right? If you look at hours worked, how much you earned, divided by hours you worked, you earned on average $100 per hour. Now, what he advocates is after you've kind of audited your calendar, as Dan mentioned, if you find that you're doing tasks that can be done by hiring somebody for 25% or less of your hourly rate. So if your rate is $100 an hour, a 200K earner is $100 an hour hourly rate. If you could hire somebody for $25 an hour or less to do some of those things, then you should be delegating those tasks immediately. And I'm actually working to implement this in my business and just kind of my personal situation as well. So my executive assistant actually handles a lot of the administrative tasks that I might otherwise have to do. Like, for example, I don't really check my email throughout the day. I mean, I have it open, but I use my email more like a search engine. If I'm looking for something that should be in my inbox, I'll go to Gmail and I'll search for it by name or, whatever. But my assistant checks my emails, and then she'll tell me if there's something important that I need to look at. Right? We have regularly scheduled check-in meetings where we can review the email box with things that she's flagged for me. Or if it's really urgent, she'll just shoot me a text message and say, "Hey, I think this is important. Why don't you take a look at this?" So that way I don't have to have my inbox sort of distracting me constantly with, "Oh, let me check this when it came in. Let me check that when I came in." He talks about in the book, Dan Martell, he talks about like, would you just like leave your office door open and let anybody walk into your office and interrupt you and demand your attention, regardless of what you might be doing at that time? Well, that's exactly what you're doing if you're allowing your email inbox to distract you every time a new message comes in. It takes away your focus and your attention. So that was a big one. Just checking my emails, figuring out what's important, what needs to be addressed, what needs time blocked to respond to, and what can just be filed away or thrown in the trash or what have you.
Yeah, that's a big one. I'm glad you just mentioned that because that was the one that like I remember I have this both on hardback and audiobook. And I remember exactly where I was when I heard him say that line. I was cutting my grass out front, right? And that was on my calendar, by the way, too, people. I had to put it on there to remind myself. But I remember where I was and I was like, oh my gosh, like that's common sense, right? Like profound statement. But yeah, if I'm working and someone barged in here, I'd be like, whoa, I'm in the middle of something. Like let me talk with you later. But yet I found myself kind of hypocritically, why am I doing that all the time when it comes to my email? And it was almost like, felt like in the early stage of my career, it was like, oh yeah, I respond to emails like text messages, like they're fast. But now I'm realizing that like that's not the purpose of my email. The purpose of my email is to obviously respond and keep engagements and conversations going. But if they needed an instant response, they could have called me or sent me a text. Right. And he actually challenges even some of those things about how you manage that flow too. But for him, he says like his email inboxes, he doesn't have access to them. That it's managed by someone else. They filter emails into different buckets. He trains them on how to respond in his type of language. And that's built over time with trust and with rapport. But I think that's a pretty cool thing. And I haven't gotten to that phase yet. I haven't been able to let that go. I think a lot of it is because as a sales professional, sometimes my inbox are things that are sales activities and timely responses help me close deals faster and advance the needle and do those high revenue generating activities. But the big one I just had a little self reflection on as well is I need to actually put 2 dedicated block times in my calendar, probably a mid morning or like a first thing in the morning and like a mid afternoon email check. And maybe there's another later night check or something after I've had my personal time and my family time to go back to my emails. But outside of that, I need to really have a discipline of like shutting down my email inboxes during those other times because I find myself way too often, like you said, Joe, long email, 15 points, takes me 30 minutes to really like research and do a design. And some of these things are complicated, right? Like some of the solar designs that we're working on really take some detail of like, well, if I move a panel here, what happens or how does this change? So that's a strategy and something I'd really recommend as well as like putting that into the calendar itself.
Absolutely, absolutely. And another one is answering the phone. Now, some people might have a different opinion on this, but my opinion is I'm not obligated to answer the phone every time it rings. In fact, I have got my phone right here. It's on do not disturb, right? This is what we're doing right now is important. I have this hour blocked in my calendar to do this, to do a live training, to answer live questions, to be on camera. So I'm not answering the phone right now. Now, it doesn't mean that once the camera goes off and I move on to my next task, maybe my next task is design a solar system for a homeowner. Well, if that's my task and that's a high value task, I'm not obligated to interrupt that and answer the phone. I can answer the phone later or they can email, right? And then my assistant will tell me, hey, maybe you should take a look at this if she thinks it's really important or urgent. But that's another thing is, do you want to allow yourself to be interrupted and taken off your schedule, taken off your flow? Are there other things that maybe you need to manage or maybe need to turn off and unplug so that you can focus on those highest value activities? Again, the key question here, guys, always is what's the most valuable use of my time right now? And when you have that sort of fully optimized calendar, the whole calendar should be full of things that are all high value and things that keep you in your area of genius. And hopefully you've delegated the other lower value tasks or things that are higher value, but you're just not the best person to do it because it doesn't really pump up your energy. And that's where it gets fun, because now you can start building a team of people with you that are talented in other areas that you're not, and you become much, much stronger as a whole.
I
Dan,
think
your
the other
thoughts?
important thing to acknowledge too, guys, is that what we're suggesting with calendar doesn't mean you can't have a little bit of flexibility in your life, right? You might have an emergency that happens. You might have a really exciting event come up that you're like, man, like I want to reward myself and I wasn't planning for this, but this came up and I want to be able to go do it, right? Like I'm an avid golfer, right? I love golf, and so if I get invited one day and I've worked hard and I've planned and I've done certain things and someone invites me to go play golf somewhere, I might be willing or flexible to adjust my schedule to accommodate that thing that brings me joy and that helps refill, my happiness, right? So don't allow the calendar to necessarily rule your life from an enjoyment and happiness perspective, but it should definitely be a very strong guideline. Also, just kind of a self reflection of like, all right, I have to look at myself and be like, all right, Danny, did you deserve to reward yourself for this? Like, have you done enough things that you should you reward yourself by cutting out early or sacrificing on this and that to go play golf? Or are you just not there yet? Right. And so those are certain things from just a general personal accountability I have to make sure of as well. Joe, a couple things that were coming to mind here, and I don't want to derail our conversation too much, but from some practical steps, because again, when I spend some time on YouTube and I'm researching things, a lot of what I like to research, I like technology. I like how can I make things more systematic and more efficient for myself. So I just wanted to kind of throw out some of the apps and the tools that I use for anybody that's maybe watching is like, hey, how can I learn more about this and that? So the first one for me every day that I know I'm using is a to-do list type of system. As I said before, my to-do list for me operates as I need to get this done, but I don't have a clear specific time it has to happen. Generally, it's I need it done within that 24-hour day, right? I need it done on October the 18th. Doesn't matter when exactly. So there's a couple different apps out there, depending on your phone system, right? I know the Apple's Reminders app has really improved, and a lot of people like to use that. I personally use one called Tick, Tick. And I like using it because I'm an Apple user on all my products, but it has a nice widget tool that goes on my Apple home screen. I can use it very easily on my computer and quickly shortcut and add notes really fast. And it's got some pretty common language. Like I could write something of, hey, send Joe email. And if I type tomorrow, it'll automatically put it on my tomorrow to-do list, my tomorrow responsibility. So that's one that I like to use. There's also an app called Todoist. That's another one that I've used in the past. Calendar wise, I use everything Gmail related and Google related, but I actually don't use the Google native calendar. I do when I'm sending out calendar invites a lot of times just because of the way the system works, but I actually use an app called Fantastical. And the reason why I like Fantastical is, again, it allows it to build right into my computer. It's an app versus having to go to like a web page. But it really works well for managing multiple calendars. So in my personal life, or just my life in general, I have my own personal calendar. I have, I'm a photographer and videographer outside of this stuff. So I have a calendar where I manage things there. I have my Radiant calendar, my Solar Surge calendar. My wife and I have a shared calendar. I have a Bills calendar. I have calendars for various other things. And so sometimes I want to be able to filter that. I want to be able to look at all the calendars just to see like, hey, what's going on? Other times, if I know that I'm during my work day, kind of my 9 to 5 time range, I only want to look at my Radiant and my Solar Surge calendar because the other things aren't as imperative. So there's ways that you can create programmable calendars and kind of filter those things and turn them on and off and see different calendars in that respect. What other tools? I mean, there's messaging tools. There's other like note taking tools and stuff, but I think those are probably like my first two big ones. I think the other one, you mentioned it, Joe, just a second ago when it came to going on Do Not Disturb. I've really leveraged Apple's newest kind of focus modes that they create. Now, Do Not Disturb is kind of like the classic one, right? It's kind of been around for a while. But I have one where I found myself, I'm the type of personality that like, if I don't cut it off, I'll just keep working and doing things. And I realized that my personal life and health and other things were being sacrificed. And I was kind of laying it down on this idea of like, oh, let's get ahead and let's hustle, like, right, hustle culture, where I had to then create focus mode. So every day my phone automatically goes into a do not disturb at 8 o'clock at night on, my weekdays, and it turns back off at 8 o'clock in the morning. And then on Fridays, it turns on a little bit earlier and it stays that way all the way through the weekend as well. So I get to protect my time for the things that are important to me. Now, I can always manually override that. I might schedule something for myself on a Saturday and go in and manually override, but I only allow notifications through on my phone from certain apps during certain times, right? So maybe that's, I don't want to be on Instagram, or I don't want to get a YouTube notification as much as we obviously would want you to like and subscribe and all those kind of things. It's like sometimes it's a distraction and you need to say, hey, like I'm not getting YouTube notifications between 9 and 5 p.m., right? Save it for later. And so there are systems and tools and shortcuts Apple has where you can kind of program things, which is pretty cool. So I've really leaned into using a lot of those things.
Yeah, I will admit, guys, as much as I probably tell you to like and subscribe and notify bell, I don't do any notify bell on YouTube. The
Yeah.
last thing in fact, I hardly use any kind of notifications, anything. I think the only notifications I have on my cell phone are transactions on my business bank account. And that's just more of like a fraud prevention, sort of financial control. I do want to know if cash is coming in or out of the business. But other than that, I don't want to be notified because, somebody uploaded another video.
Yeah, and for what that's
Um,
worth, I mean, that's my thing. I go into my settings on my notifications. I turn notifications off on everything other than my messages, my phone calls. Obviously, I want those to come through. But even like I just said, you can program focuses. But I don't want notifications on social media. I don't want notifications. Like I don't like the bubble. I'm like a bubble zero kind of person. So I turn off all the other notifications. And if I have free time and I want to go open an app and check to see, hey, what are my Facebook notifications? I'll check them inside the app, but don't push everything to me. So when you get those like push alerts, I always say don't allow personally, because I just don't want things pushing to my phone. I believe in using the technology, but in a controlled environment. And sometimes like that even goes for my Apple Watch. Like I like having an Apple Watch. I like wearing one, but I shut down every last notification on my phone or my Apple Watch other than a basic watch functionality. Unless I want to get notifications inside Windows, I'm okay with it on. So
yeah, you got to have focus. You got to have focus because there's overhead. Every time your brain has to shift gears from one task to another or one area of competence to another, there's overhead in that gear shift, right? And you want to basically stay in one zone of competence, get the best result you can in that one zone of competence, get that thing done, and then move on to the next thing. So, Dan, I just see we have a question here from Solar Guy. I'm going to put up on the screen here. And Solar Guy is asking, Dan and Joe, what app do you use to notify your clients of solar appointments, and how many notifications do they get prior to the appointment?
yeah,
So
great
thanks
question.
for that question. I know for me, I use Calendly. I've tried some other appointment setting services or notification services, but I seem to always come back to Calendly. And that's actually, if any of you take us up on the free strategy call, that's what you'll hit is a Calendly calendar page, which allows you to book the appointment. And I just use the standard notifications that Calendly does. So basically, you're going to get an email confirmation when you book the appointment, and then you'll get an email reminder the day of. So, Dan, what about you?
Yeah, yeah. So I use kind of a hybrid approach. So Calendly has been my tool if someone's booking a time like with me to have a phone call or have a Zoom meeting. But generally, those are not sales related conversations. They might be a follow up conversation, but it's not like the first initial sales engagement. What we actually use here, and we've talked about it before, is one of our CRM platforms, is built on what's called Go High Level. It's a custom version. If anyone ever wants to kind of learn more about ours, it's more tailored towards solar specifically. But that's actually what I use for new sales booking meetings. So I have certain calendars. If someone reached out and was like, hey, got your information from Bob Smith and want to book a meeting with you, I would send them the link that is company branded, to that. They would be able to book a time, and that will actually book them as a lead directly into my CRM, and it will log the appointment directly in my CRM. The advantages of doing that is now, number one, I have an appointment logged history, so I can go run reports, figure out how many sales appointments I had. Did they show? Did they no show? Did they cancel? Like, what was the outcomes? But what I do for reminders is also very different depending on what the calendar is. So if it's a sales opportunity, let's say it was a virtual sales presentation, I actually have it built in because it's my CRM where they're actually going to get a text message from me as well as an email. And typically my cadence is when they book the appointment, they get a text that says, hey, thanks so much for booking. Got you on the calendar for 5 o'clock tomorrow or whatever, right? There's dynamic fields that go into these things. Look forward to meeting with you. They'll also get an email as well. And then depending on how much time happens, there's certain filtering steps that occur. Let's say they book the meeting with me for a week out. I typically don't have my calendar open that far in advance because I want, from a sales perspective, I want to create a little more urgency. So if someone wants to book an appointment with me, my number I've found is about 4 days is how far out they can book. And if that just happens to be that I'm already, fully booked or something, then it's, I might have to create a custom time for them. But what typically will happen is they'll get a notification at the moment they book, they'll get a notification 24 hours in advance. And then I like to also send another notification about an hour, 30 minutes right before the meeting as well. And those notifications are coming via text and email a lot of times. So the cadence would typically be they get the initial thank you for booking, text message and email. They get the, hey, look forward to meeting with you again tomorrow. Just wanted to make sure, I shot you a quick reminder. Right? I'm using language that doesn't feel very robotic, right? Because I am a human after all on the other end. And then the one that's before the meeting is, hey, Joe, look forward to meeting with you in 30 minutes or look forward to chatting with you. Just wanted to send you the Zoom link one more time so you had it handy. I also sent you an email earlier today, right? So the email goes out earlier in the day. The text message is like the quick reminder 30 minutes before. And so that's the system that I found works well. And what also happens after that is if I do have a no-show or a cancellation, as soon as I enable and say no show, they'll get an alert that says, hey, sorry, we missed you. And then there's a follow-up sequence for the next maybe week of like, hey, when can we rebook? Here's my calendar. Go ahead and rebook a time with me. So that's what I use. Again, that's built on Go High Level's platform. Calendly has a lot of similar features for that exact same style. I just use the Go High Level one because that is my CRM, so it pulls it in automatically. And then I use Calendly for just personal booking, phone calls, Zoom meetings, things that are not sales focused, but more so scheduling a time with me type of activity.
Sounds good. Hey, Dan, while we're on that topic, another question that comes to mind is, how are you able to leverage technology to help you in the follow-up after the presentation's been given?
Really good question. Yeah, because again, that's a period of time as well that sometimes gets wasted. So different ways that we can do that. There's an email marketing strategy, right? So again, of course, assuming people have opted into these communications, which most of the time they have, you can market to them via email. Maybe you do a weekly newsletter. We do that here at Solar Surge where we have weekly newsletters. We have weekly emails that go out in advance of the sales training, just kind of letting people know what we're doing. So obviously, of course, if you want to, get on that blast, if you're not already, there's a link down in our description where you can kind of tune into that and kind of see how we do things here at Solar Surge. But I do that, we do that with Solar Surge. I do that with Radiant as follow-up and continuous marketing. I have text message follow-ups as well. So I have different systems where I can essentially say, hey, I want to take this customer, maybe Joe Ordia, and I want to put him into this bucket of follow-up, where once a month he gets a text message from me. Hey, Joe, just checking in with you. Hope things have been well. Whatever it may be, you got to put a little thought to what the offer is. You don't just want to kind of be like, hey, I'm just checking in, right? But there's certain things where you can use it strategically to nurture to your customers, keep having touch base points. Maybe every now and then there's a big announcement that comes out and I want to pull, a list in my CRM of all the people I've met with in the past 6 months. And I want to send a quick blast out to all those people, letting them know, hey, like I remember doing this a couple of years ago when the ITC got extended or really increased and extended. I was able to go into my system, blast everybody we had met with within the past year and let them know, hey, great news. Like solar just got more attractive for you. Give them some information, provide some value. And then they were able to re-engage with me. So I use those systems for follow-up purposes just as much as I use it for initial lead nurturing, right? I also want to use that to help follow up and be a tool that aids me in that process. Because I know for, the longer you're in this industry, I get people that reach out to me, hey, I met with you 3 years ago. I'm ready to go solar now. But if I didn't keep in front of them and my name wasn't in mind, it's very easy for them to click on a new ad and work with a new person, when they were ready. So that ongoing nurturing can kind of feel like a waste of time when you're doing it. But again, if you block your calendar appropriately for it, maybe you create your nurturing sequence on one day of the month for the entire month, right? Maybe you do an email a week and you're like, you know what, I'm going to block an hour on Monday, the first Monday of the month. I'm blocking an hour. I'm going to write my email sequence for this month and it's done. It's over with and I can move on to other activities. And then you have the nurturing that would continue from there. So that's maybe a practical tip you could use too.
Cool. Cool. Hey, we got another question coming in here. I know we're kind of getting towards the end of the hour here, but Paul Sutton asks, does your Solar U provide any sales support such as Aurora or other software platforms? So thanks for that question, Paul. Solar Surge University itself, it actually shows you part of the modules. There's a few lessons that show you how to build a design in Aurora and how to deliver a sales presentation using Aurora. But as far as Aurora Access itself, that would be something you wouldn't get until you actually came on board as a Solar Surge dealer. So all Solar Surge dealers have access to our Aurora platform. Again, part of our philosophy here is having the most accurate information at the time of sale, so that you will set yourself apart from the other salespeople, but so that the homeowners can also make the most informed decision and have a really accurate feeling and understanding of what exactly this solar system can do for them. So if you did come onto the Solar Surge dealer network, you would have access to our Aurora. That's not something that you would have to pay for on your own. Dan,
Yeah.
anything on that?
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it there as well. I think a couple other things, Paul, just to give some context or to anybody that's listening. Part of what we also provide here at Solar Surge, if you're part of the dealer, network, is email, is access to kind of the Solar Surge brand. To Joe and I's time, one of the things we're actually getting ready to roll out here pretty soon is going to be a more closed environment. Weekly Zoom meeting where people that are part of the network, that are looking for technical answers to questions or a deal they're actively working on and they're running into a roadblock. Like, we want to be here to help support and advance your businesses, your career, your opportunities. And sometimes you're just leveraging a little bit of the knowledge that we have, right? So that's one of the things that we're getting ready to roll out here pretty soon to all of our dealers, is private access to a weekly Zoom meeting, a drop-in Zoom meeting where you can plug in, your team can plug in, whatever, ask us a question, share your screen, and we're here to help, right? That's something we want to do. And as much as we, would love to do it here in this live format, it's just not set up that way for this. But of course, our any Solar Surge dealer can tune into our weekly. I mean, we've talked about this before. Like, this is designed to be a sales training. It's kind of like the team huddle we used to do once a week, back in the day. Now this is just more public format where the internet can access it. And we want to provide the value but that's part of what's coming as well within the dealer program, amongst other softwares and tools. And we have a CRM system that we manage projects within, that you'll have full transparency and access to up to date, information on, the install, where things are at, what's going on. So those are part of the software stack, if you will, that we provide ourselves.
Hey, Dan, real quick here, Visionary Gaming just put a question here. Do you have to be enrolled in Solar Surge University to become a dealer? Great question. The answer is no, you don't necessarily have to be, but the best way to find out whether you would be qualified to come on board directly without going through the university first is to take us up on that free strategy call. So that's why we offer the free strategy call, is just sort of be able to chat through, where you are in your solar business, where you'd like to go, whether it would make sense for you to work with Solar Surge as part of the network, or whether Solar Surge University might be might be the right next step for you. So that's why we offer that free strategy call. You can book at the link there, solarsurge.pro/free call. But before we run out of time here, Dan, because I know we're kind of getting to the end of the hour, I did want to just briefly share the Solar Surge model calendar. And we actually do have a whole lesson in Solar Surge University on time management. But this is just an example of what a model calendar might look like, where you have time every day for your self-care, physical fitness, but then during your business hours, you've got time for prospecting, you've got time for lead generation or social media, you have time for delivering proposals, you have time for follow-up. Of course, making time for your administrative activities, necessary administrative activities, and just everything that has to be done should be on this calendar somewhere, right? There really should be very, very little white space on that calendar. And if there is white space, it should be because, well, maybe you just didn't get as many leads this week as you had targeted for. And so you have a couple of open slots where you don't necessarily have to be giving presentations. But you really want to have that, just like you said, Dan, you really want to have that budget sort of fully allocated of where it should all go. Again, making sure that the things that are important, the things that need to happen, the things that are important to you, have time allocated to them. So you're not just scrambling. You're not just, everything should be orderly and controlled. And if you do have a little bit of extra slack time, then great. You can run some errands, or maybe you can do some other high value activities on some of your big picture goals. Dan, I'll let you close us out here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a great example. And, there's different ways to be efficient with it as well. Some people, I color code my calendar, right? Different colors tell me different things. There's ways to do that. Obviously, these are all shown here in hour blocks, but sometimes it's a task that's only 30 minutes. But, either way, I think the main general premise here, guys, is if you don't control your time will control you. And so the main goal of what we're really trying to get across is proper time management can lead you to where you want to go, lead you to how you want to earn, lead you to the places you want to go in your business and in your personal life and whatever else it may be. So having a focus on this, utilizing tools, utilizing resources that are there, and really getting a full grasp on your time is going to be critical, not just in solar, but in any business and any facet of life in general. So with that, guys, we're a little bit over the hour. Of course, we enjoyed speaking to you and delivering today's topic. And like we often say, too, we're back here every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 o'clock Pacific for a full hour to provide maximum value to you guys. So maybe consider putting it on your schedule, right? Put it on the schedule, time plan for it, manage it. And we'll look forward to tuning in with you guys again next week. Hope you have a wonderful week, and we will talk soon.